Hi, Volker. Thanks for joining GCM Expertise. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
That's great. I mean, today what we wanted to talk to you about with your experience, particularly, is around leadership and building a team that really works and understanding how that all fits together. But before we get into that, it'd be great to get an understanding of where you've come from, your journey up until now, and also a bit more about what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. Where do I start, right? I was born, so in case people wonder about my name or my accent, I was born actually in Germany. Moved to the UK in 2001, met my now wife, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I ended up in sales, more by accident than by design. I think it's true probably for 99% of salespeople. So I ended up in telemarketing, moved through the ranks to CEO positions, and in 2019, so just in time for COVID,
Mm.
just finished writing my first book on success on the back of my podcast, Stories of Success. So I printed 400 copies to give away in 2020 at conferences instead of business cards, right, as you would. And yeah, anyway, so pandemic had different plans. But I went self-employed, so I now work as a fractional sales consultant. And so that's probably about 20% of my time, and 80% of my time is leadership coaching, sales leadership coaching in particular, running workshops for client success and sales and marketing. And yeah, just working with leaders and get them to understand what authentic leadership means and what it means to be emotionally intelligent in organizations and being human, as I say, right? Just
Yeah,
human. So that's what I do now.
awesome. That's brilliant, Volker. That's great. It sounds like a pretty varied job you have today, if you like. I don't know whether job's the right term, but you have a very varied portfolio to look after, which is great. Because you've met so many leaders and worked with so many leaders, it'd be great to understand a little bit more about. There is a kind of phrase that looks around, throws around leadership and teams around alignment and the direction, I guess, that a leader brings to that alignment and across the team. What have you seen in the way of the cost of that when that goes wrong, when there is misalignment amongst a leadership team? And I assume that's kind of one of your benefits
Yeah.
bringing you in, is to help that leadership team find the alignment and to lead from the front. But what have you seen? What are the problems with misalignment in an organization?
How much time do we have? I mean, I often brought in by C-level saying, listen, we have a senior leadership team. Volker, can you work with them? And here's the brief. And, whether it's a workshop or, individual coaching, to get a little bit in the weeds. And because there's usually one person, there's always one, right, on a senior leadership team where the CEO says, not quite sure about that person, right? And it often comes down to alignment, right? And alignment can come in different shapes and forms. So when I work with leadership teams, it's everyone on board for the vision, right? Particularly if we talk start and scale ups, right? It's often the CEO or the founder going like, oh yeah, I have this great vision, but might have not communicated it to the team. So the team comes in and goes like, oh yeah, I used to do this, I used to do that. And in silos, they just go off and do their own thing.
Mm.
And then it might not align with the vision. So a friend of mine just put a great post out there yesterday on LinkedIn saying, I have these people that go to start and scale ups, and after 9 months they come back and say, oh, it didn't work out, right? Because I was just doing my thing, but there was no match, right? I didn't align with their vision. So it's very important that a CEO actually sets out the vision, and that's true for start and scale ups,
Mm.
but also obviously for bigger companies, right? You want everyone to row in the same direction. And what I find with sales in particular, often, sales, client success, and marketing need to be aligned, right? I mean, the age-old question, should there be a CMO or COO or both, right? And I can discuss that. Coming from the COO background, I would say the COO should be there, right?
Mm.
We can look after marketing. And
Mm.
my CMO friend would say the same, saying I can look after sales. But it is that understanding that again, everyone moves in the same direction. And what I have done in the past, more than once, I think in every assignment I had, is aligning sales and product, because they
Mm.
often don't talk.
Mm.
The sales is out there on the front lines, fighting, getting the feedback from the market, and then sitting on that feedback, not passing it on to product. And product just goes like, oh, churn out one product after
Mm.
another. Never talked to customer before. And I'm like, you
Mm.
guys need to talk, right? It's just like a no-brainer. So that's a very common mistake I see all the time.
You mentioned that that's a really good one, because I think we at GTM Expertise believe in this. GTM is a blend of product, sales, and marketing, and especially in a startup, you mentioned that obviously teams are smaller. Theoretically, the gap from the customer to the CEO, or the customer to whoever needs that feedback,
Yeah,
should be quite short, right? Because there's not a lot of this kind of infrastructure or hierarchy in place to make that happen. But you mentioned a really good point, because I think we had one interview recently around getting feedback from the customers really quickly. Early days is almost more important than the revenue and the selling part of it. So how do you get that working? What needs to happen to make sure that's a
yeah,
seamless kind of approach?
you're right. I mean, startups need to have feedback very early on, right? Because they're constantly pivoting, right? They're constantly changing until they have the gap. Again, classic example. I got an email, funny enough, early on this week of someone I pitched myself to beginning of last year. We never ended up working together, but I said, how's the business going, right? What are you doing now? And he says, oh, we pivoted another 5 or 6 times. What we're doing now is X, right? But that's normal, right? And
Yeah.
until you have pivoted to a point where you say, actually, I'm happy with that. That's when you get the expertise involved, right? So you might have a junior salesperson, but usually it's all founder-led sales, which means the founder, whether technical or not, should have the client contact, right? The customer contact, there's a connection to the market to actually find out, is there an MVP, is there a gap in the market? I mean, I'm working with a really exciting startup at the moment in Kenya, actually, through an accelerator. And they came to us, and this is their proposition. And we had a coaching session last night. And I'm like, wait a second, you're talking about a secondary product here, right? Well, yes, that's a feature we're offering. I'm like, why do you call it a feature? Why is that not actually a full product? And then he said, actually, our competitor is doing something very similar as well. I'm like, it would make sense, this is a go-to-market strategy for both products, in my opinion. So he's going to be sitting on that for another week until we continue. But it is that, where you go like, actually, I have two products there. This is not just another feature on our platform. This
Yeah.
is another revenue stream, a complete different product. And that's why I get still very excited working with startups, right?
Yeah.
And early stages. But
Yeah.
then also the founder needs to know when they step away, basically, right? That's the next trick.
Yeah, and we this comes up almost every time in our discussions. This concept of founder-led sales, and this letting go, and it depends on the founder too, right? I think you can have quite commercially orientated founders. You can have very technical founders. You can have a blend. But bringing in those next people to bring those in. Firstly, you've got to have that alignment that you mentioned earlier. But second, I think it's really important to think about how they go and get that blend of product feedback and for marketing too, right? And bring all that back into the GTM environment. And in small teams, their role title might be one thing, but in a startup in particular, scale up in particular,
Yeah.
it's not that easy to just pick up the role title and go run with it, right?
No.
There's a lot of adaptation, and you mentioned another thing earlier, which I think was really good, which is uncomfortable, and I think in those roles you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and those pivots, because those pivots can happen quite a bit, and you have to take that on the chin. So how does that work in terms of, you bring in someone, you say, right, your job's now business development manager or whatever, you give them a title, but
Yeah.
that fuzziness, I guess, around clarity there.
I mean, in startups, I think if you join a startup, your role changes every 5 minutes, right? Let's face it, right? One day you're going after, I don't know, C-level. Next day you're going after, I don't know, marketing people. Who knows, right? It is a constant pivot, and you need to be comfortable with that, right? As a salesperson, right? And as long as you get the good market feedback and you have an influence with the founder, I
Mm,
think that's fine. It's not
mm,
made for everyone, right? That's why I say big corporations still exist, right? So some people
yeah,
want to have a structured job where they say, okay, the next 25 years, I'm going to do this job. I might get a new thing every 3 years, if I'm lucky.
mm, mm,
Wouldn't be for me, right? I always liked the startup environment because it makes it so exciting,
mm,
right? I mean, there was a startup I worked for a long time. The founder was actually very, very commercially minded, almost too commercially minded,
mm,
which meant he was interfering quite a bit with sales. and he was very opinionated and wouldn't take on advice from more experienced people. However, he was very, very smart. He was very focused where he wanted to go. Bought different companies, put it all together very nicely. And I lost touch with him now, but I think he's doing quite well. Knowing when to let go and say, okay, we now have a salesperson that can take care of that, and that person understands that we might pivot another, 100 times until we're ready.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of startups. I think it's the beauty of startups. And I talked to someone yesterday, when you have technical founders and they pitch and they go too much into the weeds, right? That's another challenge, right? So because they're so in the weeds and they think the customer wants to know, if I say, every second coding line in the platform, and the customer doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Finding that balance. But that's where emotional intelligence comes in as well, right? Starting with self-awareness, right? Being aware of who you are as a leader, how you come across, how you sell, how you put your vision out to your team, and when it's time to step back, know your strengths, basically, right?
Yeah, and I've come across plenty of leaders in my experience too, and this concept of emotional intelligence. I'd like to double click on that because can you teach it? That's a good question.
Yes, yeah, it's teachable. It's a skill. It's if I say it's very simple, it's a skill.
Yeah.
Yes, you can teach it. I mean, I'm trained in EQI 2.0, which is essentially an assessment for emotional intelligence, which I love to use with leaders just to get a baseline understanding what they're doing or how the emotional intelligence is formed. You will find areas that need improvement, right? So whether that is around stress management or it is around self-awareness, and you can coach those skills. You can go in and say, okay, your self-awareness needs to improve. So start journaling, start doing this, let's have a conversation on things. Your emotional response to stress, right? To uncertainty, all these things, right? You can measure it. I think anything you can measure, you can improve, right? As we know, from a pure data point of view or data analysis point of view. So that's why that's why most coaches will be associated with some kind of profiling tool or another, right? So I specialize in EQ. I also do some strengths profiling. Others do GC index, or that there's so many tools out there. But it gives you a good baseline on looking at it. I mean, I'm running a workshop for a team in a couple of weeks' time where we just use the basic, if I say it's a free assessment from the Myers-Briggs. Even that gives you a very simple overview, in terms of who you are. You're extroverted, introverted, and yeah. It gives you a good base to build up on, and then you can measure it as well. You can go back 6 months later and go like, what has improved?
Yeah.
How do you think things have improved for you?
I really like that because I think perhaps in the market there's a concept that folks go from corporate or they could start from scratch, entrepreneurs, and there's this kind of picture painted about what an entrepreneur is, but from what I'm hearing from you, almost certainly what I've seen is there's a whole spectrum of different folks who end up starting companies and leading and end up being a leader, maybe not by design, by accident, or and then the concept that then you can shape that leader into, they're going to have their strengths, they're going to have their weaknesses, and you're going to work on those and using these tools. That sounds really good because I think what I've seen in companies is around having being able to have those difficult conversations can come really easily to some people and very hard to others. And you might have seen this in often there's one or two folks at the head of the company, especially in a startup. It's typical to have a co-founder, typically very different people because they're bringing very different skills to it. You don't really want two of the same. So how does that play into it with emotional intelligence and just the ability to have those difficult conversations where you might have to pivot and you might have to throw away all the work you did for the last year because either the market's not ready or it's just not working and we need to move now? How does that happen? How do you help create that environment for a difficult discussion?
Let's use an example. Obviously, you can do group assessments as well, which is really interesting, where other people then essentially judge you. I don't know if judge is the right word, right? Rate you maybe is the better word.
Yeah.
So, whether it's for emotional intelligence or other aspects. So similar to 360, really.
Right.
With the leader at the moment, she, it's really interesting. looking at the complete 360 profile, and how her peers have rated her versus her subordinates versus her manager. Really, really great stuff. And she works in a big corporate, so which makes it even more interesting, to be honest. But if you boil it back to a startup, so let's say you have two founders. Let's say one is very commercially minded, very outgoing, and the other one might be a very technical, if I say almost like a geeky founder, right? In the best possible sense. Nothing against geeks. I can be quite geeky myself here.
Sure.
But so you might have an introvert and an extrovert, and that will cause friction. Just by default, they can be the best friends, but as a sales guy, if I say I was a commercial minded guy, I might just want to go out and let's just sell, and let's do it. And whilst the technical guy might say, no, we need to build the product first, and all the coding is right. We don't want to go and talk to anyone about it. And it's finding that balance. And sometimes the founders can't find that balance themselves. So you almost come in as a mediator, right? Or call it advisor, call it coach, call it mentor, whatever label you want to give me. And working with them and go like, guys, where are we going? What are the common things, you both see, and what are the things you disagree on, and why do you disagree? And then you can bring in some of your own experience as well, right? And say, okay, maybe you get something together, show it to the market, get some feedback, sit back down, and then decide. But it's like yin and yang, right? You're trying to bring them to the table, right? It's not always easy. It's just like parts integration in therapy, right? You have two different parts inside you, right? The devil and the angel, and you're like,
Yeah.
So it's fun. I really enjoy doing that kind of work, but it can be quite difficult depending on the founder.
Yeah.
Especially as the company grows, right? Because one wants to maybe just go off and work in the background and do all the technical stuff, while the other person just wants to go out and be seen as the leader of the company. I mean, look at Steve Jobs and Wozniak, right? Wozniak just, not that I ever met either of them, but he seems to be the guy that just wants to sit in the garage and building things, while Steve Jobs wants to tell the world about it, right? So yeah, it's that balance, right? A bit.
And those discussions that, I can imagine because you have got not opposite, but very different skill sets, because that's the complementary is probably the better word, right? And you have complementary skills, that's great, but then there's going to be conversations where each has an opinion on the other's responsibilities, if you like, and managing those can be very tricky, I'm sure. But that's really insightful. I think a lot of people who are watching this will be feeling like they're seeing something they understand and they relate to there. What do you think the hardest bit about moving from it? Like a lot of startups might find themselves in a co-founding team of two, and maybe not have anyone else.
Yeah.
In a year's time, they might be 10. Like that's a big shift for anyone to manage. And when you've only got one co-founder to manage, and it's relatively straightforward. Now you've got layers, hopefully not too many at 10, but you've got this kind of dynamic completely shifted. How do you find that goes with people who are founding a team for the first time?
Yeah. I think it's important to understand your role, right? And where you sit in the role. So be honest with each other. I think as founders, right, whatever the tension is, talk about it. Have these regular conversations, and don't, if I say as a commercial person and maybe an outgoing person, don't just go off and lead the company. Don't leave the techie behind, right? If that makes sense. Unless the techie agrees, it might go like, you know what, I happily let you lead the company. I'm taking a step back. I'm keeping my options, but I'm over there in the dark room and programming away. Obviously, I'm exaggerating here a little bit. And whatever they decide, but talk about it, right? And if not, you can both lead the company. There's nothing wrong with having a technical and a commercial leader in a company, because they also have different appeal to different people in the company, right? So like once you start hiring product people and more technical people, they might look more as from leadership perspective, they're looking at the technical leader maybe more than the commercial leader. So it can work. It can be creating a really nice dynamic. And if you're looking at a typical C-suite, you have a CEO and you have a CTO, right? Or maybe a CTPO, so Chief Technology Product Officer. And then you might bring in, I don't know, a Chief Revenue Officer or Chief Marketing Officer, or obviously, labels. Could be Marketing Director, Sales Director, or whatever.
Yep.
And I think as long as you get the structure right, and as long as you get again, very timely, I just read a newsletter from a friend of mine about design thinking in terms of, do we have to have a hierarchy or not in a 10-person organization? As long as you appeal to different people, I think it can work really nicely. As long as the founders team talk to each other, I think that's, that communication needs to be, established. They need to align on decisions, right? So when they go to a board meeting or even a company meeting and they say, we're going right, they both agree we're going right and not, oh yeah, I want
Yes.
to go left. And
Yes.
why did you just decide we're going right? And we haven't talked about this, right? And now we're telling the company we're going one direction, not the another.
Yeah.
That's the worst, right? Misalignment, because what then happens, you don't have trust with the people you're leading. If you don't have the trust,
Yeah.
people stop following you. They stop believing in the product. They're not selling as well. They're not, producing as well. They're not on board, basically. And that's when things start falling apart and unraveling.
You mentioned the hierarchy of, say, a 10-person startup, and I think that's exactly who we're aiming at here in a GFTM expertise, trying to elicit advice from experts around go-to-market, but broader startups in general. Is it your experience? I'm just throwing it out there that
Yeah.
Folks coming from corporate to end up in a 10-person startup are really perhaps focused on the hierarchy more than and they bring in and they're trying to draw but my experience is sometimes these small teams are way over indexing on the administration and hierarchy and
Yeah.
and I guess not a flat organization at that level. I've worked for companies 400 500 people that felt flatter than a 10-person startup. So, like, is that your experience? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it happens, unfortunately. Absolutely. It comes down to processes rather than the hierarchy, in my opinion. Because I mean, I'm mentoring a lot of people that go into startup advisory roles or fractional roles with startups. And when people go in and they think, oh yeah, I'm coming from a C-level or, maybe director level of an organization, startup, I must be at least VP or whatever. No one cares about your title.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need the title, in my opinion, when you apply for the next job.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I've gone into
Yeah.
startups where I just called myself the sales guy. And then the
Right.
CEO, no, you need a proper title. I'm like, do I? For what, really? And it's a process,
Yeah.
How do things work? How do we get things done? It's not about hierarchy. It's not about the title. I mean, it's all hands to the pump, right? You work in a startup, you have to work late. Although I talked to a startup, interesting enough, and they said, oh, we want to have this culture that everyone works really late. And we can't have people that need to go home at 5 o'clock to look after their children. I'm like, this is the wrong attitude as
Yeah.
well, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
if you want everyone on board, let them work whenever they want, right? And don't force them to work until 11. But if they are on board, they will work until 11.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
It's creating the right culture, which is so difficult,
Yeah.
and that comes back to the founders, right? If the founders don't set
Yeah.
the example, you can't have a founder clocking off at 5 o'clock and expect everyone else to work until 7 or 8 at night. And,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
because you start up doesn't mean you have to work until 7 or 8 o'clock at night either, right? Not everything you read in the press is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
it will be culture shock coming from a big corporate and working with
Yeah.
startups.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, it's the hierarchy. I mean, hierarchy in the best of things. I mean, best of places doesn't make much sense. I mean, you need to have reporting lines, but in big organizations, you have managers just to manage up and manage down, right? You wouldn't have that in a startup, right? I mean, you don't need just someone there to manage up and down, but people need, a bit of structure is good, but you don't want to overdo it, especially not in a startup where you change the structure every 2 months anyway.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to kind of round out some of this, the clarity that you're looking to provide as a leader comes from alignment. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, alignment's not a one and done thing, right? Like, how often are you seeing this being is it a daily thing that needs to be sort of thought about? Are you providing, you often get these kind of summits, if you like, in a stuff where there's a big sort of session and then everyone goes off for a few
Yeah.
weeks or whatever, but you've got to have these as a leadership team and as a larger startup, you're going to have regular meetings. How do you weave this in as a leader into your sort of day-to-day being?
Yeah, so I think that the alignment, I mean, comes from open communication, from regular communication, right, with a senior leadership team, right, get everyone on board. It comes from regular workshops, right, and then following up with the actions from the workshop. And I mean, how often you want to do those workshops? How often do you pivot, right? How often do you
Right.
change things, right? I mean, I'm doing a workshop for a company well established, right? I don't actually know how old they are, but they, so they've been around, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. And they just want me to facilitate a workshop for the client success and sales team
Mm.
to actually talk about what's going well, what's not going well, what is the process, what is the alignment between our two, units, and
Mm.
what can we learn from each other? How can we move things forward? And it's a very simple thing to do, right? But we don't do it often enough. As soon as we notice there's a bit
Yeah.
of action, as soon as we pivot ever so slightly, let's get everyone in a room. It doesn't have to be a whole day workshop. It can be 2-3 hours. Just get everyone on the same boat. Give them clarity. Go out, try and test, and particularly in a startup, and come back, change a bit, go out again, right, and then modify.
And I can imagine, and this is probably why you're doing really well with what you're doing.
Yeah,
This is a lot easier achieved with external facilitation, right? The kind of day-to-day relationship, and I guess it's
yeah,
a human thing as well with relationships. It's very hard to break out of the day-to-day relationship of interaction to suddenly like big picture. Let's be very like introspective and look at everything, and then go back to the day-to-day. It can be helpful to have that external facilitation, right?
I would 100% agree with that statement.
But it makes sense, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it is hard to have again, difficult discussions, hard truths to share, and on a day-to-day basis, sometimes you just push those hard decisions a bit further down the line. You just kind of like, maybe I'll address that next week. I've got so much going on this week, and it gets pushed and pushed. And the longer that is left or happens, I think the harder that becomes to fix.
yeah, and I mean, with external, I mean, it's with anything. That's why coaching works, right? I mean, I don't want to undersell myself here, right? But coaching is, giving you a sounding board, right? Asking the right questions. I'm not adding, if I say to your topic, I can add to the topic. I become more of a mentor, and given my experience, I
Mm,
often, if I say I ask for permission to do so sometimes if I
mm.
think it's relevant. But it's really creating a space where you can start thinking about things and being pointed in the right direction a little bit. And that's why coaching works. And that's how coaching workshops work, right? Workshops, because essentially that you're doing the same thing just on a company level and say, listen, guys, let's just, zoom out for a moment, and I can facilitate that. And because I understand sales marketing, I've run startups, right? I can facilitate that. I understand the pain points you're having. So I can obviously give input as well at that stage.
Perfect. Volker, this was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you,
For
Ben.
me, great clarity around the topics of alignment and leadership and how those come together. We wish you well with your business, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
so much for sharing your expertise with us here on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure to be with you.
No worries. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye bye.